Hello again, HI 101 students. Just a quick note here. If you're wondering why I'm looking down like this, it's because that I have corrective vision in my glasses. And with these type of lenses, I have to find the focus point, and I have to look up like that sometimes in order to find what I'm reading. So that's why I look like I do at times. In this chapter, we are discussing chapter 6, which is creating a more perfect union. The original government, the first written constitution, was the Articles of Confederation. They did have some successes in creating representative government as a way of going forward. They were able to get the Treaty of Paris signed in 1783, which officially ended the revolution. And it was the creation of the Northwest Ordinance especially that created the system for the Great Lakes area states to become, or territories to become states. This system was very, very effective in the course of the development of the United States. The weaknesses of the article: no executive, there's no common currency, each state had their own money in some cases. There's no system to collect revenue or taxes. The states are more powerful than the national government. They couldn't regulate interstate commerce. States, again, were taxing items coming from other states. And as a result of that, the economy was run down by 1786-87, symbolized by the weakness in Shays' Rebellion, where those Massachusetts farmers rebelled against what the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was attempting to do in foreclosing the mortgages on their farms. Eventually, the new Constitution is developed in 1787. Sovereignty resides in the people, and they created the dual sovereign, or the divided sovereign, between the national, state, and local governments. This is the unique American contribution to political science. It created these simultaneously operating levels of government. And the arguments going forward ideologically are: what is the proper area? What is the proper sphere for the implementation of laws or the development of laws and solving them? What level, federal, state, or local, should be doing this? And it's a never-ending argument in American political history. The Virginia Plan was a support for population being the basis of representation, and opposed to that was the New Jersey Plan, where it wanted to continue the same system that they had with the Articles, where each of the states was equal. And the Great Compromise, or Connecticut Plan, of Roger Sherman combined both into the bicameral legislature, or the bicameral government that we have today, of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Separation of powers is mentioned in the Federalist Papers, explaining, especially in number 51, on how this is going to operate in theory. Article 3 is about the judiciary, and very little is said in the original Constitution. And the Judiciary Act of 1789 will try to address some of those unknown things that are done. And in Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court will establish what it's going to do, its umpire role, or its idea of determining laws being constitutional or unconstitutional, since Marbury is what the Supreme Court does to this day, even though there's nothing in the original Constitution saying that this is going to be its function. Article 6 says that the Constitution itself, right in the original document, which was ratified by the states, says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So it's implicit from the beginning that over time, this national government is going to become more and more powerful. And that's what the anti-federalists were very, very concerned about. We just fought a revolution to get rid of this powerful central government of King George III. Now you want to go back to it? And in one of the last Federalist Papers, James Madison was successful in convincing many of these anti-federalists, such as Mercy Otis Warren and George Clinton, Richard Henry Lee, that a Bill of Rights will be passed that will be protections of civil liberties against actions of this powerful national government. And their arguments won the day because the Constitution was ratified. Publius was the pseudonym of Hamilton Madison Jay. Brutus was the pseudonym in all these different essays that were written and published in state newspapers about this debate over the new system that was developed. And out of these original anti-federalists and federalists will develop the first major political parties. The Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans will develop out of anti-federalists, and the Federalist Party itself, they called themselves that, were mainly supporters of the ideas of Alexander Hamilton, which is basically the view of developing a commercial capitalist republic, more on that in a moment, whereas the Jeffersonians are more in favor of an agrarian republic going forward. Ironically enough, The Wealth of Nations, which is sometimes considered the Bible of capitalism, was written in the same year as the American Revolution. You need, according to Mr. Smith, reward those risk takers or entrepreneurs. And they will be penalized if they don't meet the proper point in supply and demand. And going forward in the 19th century will be these arguments between these two. Eventually, the commercial capitalists, as you're going to see, are going to win out if you take American Nation 2. Hamilton's plans, there's 4 big parts. The tariff will protect manufacturers. They have a fledgling industrial system developing during the very late 18th century and going forward. It'll be exacerbated by the War of 1812, as we'll see, when the Americans now have all British stuff cut off. Those exports are gone, so they're going to have to fend for themselves, and that's when manufacturing really takes off, because they have to build their own supplies of different materials. He used implied powers coming out of the Elastic Clause to develop the bank, which he believed would support a sound currency. And the Jeffersonians are definitely against this because there's nothing in the Constitution about a national bank. And in return for assuming these state debts, the new capital is going to be built in the South in what becomes the District of Columbia. The Jeffersonians agreed to support some of these economic plans of Hamilton in return for that compromise. During the 1790s, the French Revolution is going on, and because of this, Hamilton and Jefferson are going to become very bitter rivals. The Hamiltonians basically are pro-British oriented because they're trade oriented. They're commerce people. They're commercial manufacturers and shipbuilders and traders, when most of the trade at that time goes on with Britain. Whereas the agrarians, the Jeffersonians, support the French in this battle. Eventually, Britain and some of the other European nations are going to step in to try to stop some of the bloody social revolution that is going on in Europe as a result of the French Revolution and the ideas of nationalism that are being spread by the French, especially after Napoleon comes to power. Pinckney's Treaty was very popular. It helped to reestablish trade with the Caribbean, and it also settled some of the problems with Florida for a time before Secretary of State Adams will finally completely solve that in the Adams-Onee Treaty of 1819. But at this time, they made a clear boundary between Spanish Florida and Georgia. Washington led troops against the Whiskey Rebellion. The revenuers, as they're sometimes called in the South, they didn't want to pay that tax, and this was suppressed. Washington actually got on horseback again and led those troops down there to try to suppress this revolution against the power of the national government. In the Wilderness Road, it was cut by Daniel Boone, and eventually 300,000 settlers are going to follow that during those years into what is today Kentucky, a very lucrative and wonderful natural area with natural resources and game and bountiful soil and fertile soil for farming. Washington warned in his farewell address to stay out of the affairs of the old world, and that will eventually come to be called the foreign policy of isolationism. Adams succeeded him. He also has problems with Jefferson because of this quasi-war that's going on with France during this time. There are many people, French patriots in the United States, drumming up support for the French in their battles in the 1790s. And because of that, the Alien and Sedition Acts, this is really the last straw of the Adams administration, which limited speech, press, and the liberty of immigrants. And it seemed to point out what the Jeffersonians were saying about Adams as being true, that he's really just a monarchist and he's really pro-British. Again, the revolution is fresh in people's minds still during this time. The Convention of 1800 formally ends the military alliance between the U.S. and France. The election of 1800, sometimes known as the Second American Revolution, because Jefferson, the opposition, ends up winning in the House of Representatives because of the tie in the Electoral College with Burr. He wins in the House vote and becomes president. Burr, because he came in second, will be the new vice president. And eventually the 12th Amendment will clear this up with the president and vice president running as a single ticket. It will no longer be the second place finisher being named vice president. And so ends chapter 6.